No, it's just starting.
Just start.
Give it just a couple more minutes before getting started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Matthew Santagata. I'm the Lakefront Planning Coordinator with the Chicago Park District. On behalf of everyone at CPD, I want to welcome all of you to our community meeting. We're really excited to be getting back together and sharing what has taken place so far. It looks like we have a really good turnout tonight. I'm sure you all have questions. So to make sure everyone gets a chance to have their voice heard, we're going to go through the presentation and then at the end, shift to a Q&A session. Everybody should have a little Q&A box on the bottom of their Zoom screen. So that's separate than the usual chat function. So as we go through the meeting, if you have any questions, go ahead and type that into that box. And then once we hit the end, we'll go back and answer your questions. I'm also going to link in the regular chat a feedback form hosted on the Chicago Park District webpage. Do you have any comments or feedback at the end of this evening, any point in the future, feel free to submit that on that form. It gets emailed to me and I'll make sure to reply. So jumping in, if you want to hit the next slide. So we wanted to start off with a project recap and then provide you an update with the design work to date, discuss next steps, and then take everything you've heard tonight and get your thoughts and feedback. So before beginning with DuSable, I wanted to provide a brief update on our neighbors over at 400 Lakeshore Drive. Just as a reminder, we're very grateful to them for their $10 million contribution to getting this park built. They are currently using DuSable Park as a staging ground for their construction, and then ultimately will phase into constructing the park itself. So a little update as to what's been happening on the tower site. From Q1 to Q2 of 2024, they've been establishing foundations, drilling and installing caissons. That foundation work will continue until the Q4 of 2024, and then you'll start to see structure being produced at ground level. And then regarding our own site, we're looking at starting construction in 2026, and ultimately the park and Riverwalk opening the Q3 of 2027. These are projected dates, so we have every expectation to meet them, but we'll certainly keep you posted as we advance through the design and construction process. We're really working in partnership with Related Midwest, so as they move forward, it brings us closer to our own finish line. And if you have any questions regarding related projects, feel free to ask them as well, and we can pass those along to their team. Next slide. So we wanted to give you an update as to what the design team has been up to since you've last met with us. So on this slide, you can see some of what we've been hard at work on, starting off with the community meetings, steering committee meetings, park advisory committee meetings. We've been taking everything that we've heard from you and listening and using that info to refine the design, which we will share tonight. And then, of course, throughout this process, we've been coordinating with other agencies. Whenever you have a project with a scope, you really want to make sure that you are working alongside all the different agencies. You don't want to get too far in the design process, and you want to make sure you identify anything that could be a cause for change. And we also want to make sure that we're taking advantage of all the expertise available to us. So we've been working with the Department of Transportation, Department of Fire, the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, to name a few. We've also been developing details and solutions to address existing conditions. Part of the reason why this site is so special is because it's kind of located at a nexus amongst the lake, the river, the downtown skyline. And that also kind of makes it a bit of a challenge to access the site. So we've been exploring how to connect to the flyover with colleagues from CDOT We've also been exploring drop-off locations for those looking to access the park by car or bus. Just try to make sure everyone can get to the site. Grading has also been a major component that we've been working on. As we'll see in the plans on the next few slides, there are hills on site that are sort of creative ways that we've made use of the existing soil. And what this does is kind of, one, facilitates the connection to the flyover, but also adds an element of verticality that increases the amount of space that we have to work with. And it also allows visitors to experience some really unique views of the lake and skyline. So making that possible has taken some work. And of course, as you can imagine, water connections and utilities have been a priority. It's been a long time since this area was developed. So a lot of those original utility lines have been disconnected or need to be rethought. We also will be sharing the material development. This is everything from the hardscape and the softscape, so the more natural side of things, which we will share with you. Cost estimates, these are still continuing to be refined. We started out with our original cost estimate, and of course, it's kind of been a priority, making sure we're not only staying in budget, but also progressing efficiently and responsibly. And then last but not least, on-site activation. So here on this slide, you can see an image from the Chicago Architectural Biennial. So this is something the community had originally asked for, sort of a coming soon attraction, raising awareness and sparking conversation. So Carol and her team, in conjunction with the Architectural Biennial, came up with this idea, these sort of structures and outlines that are representative of DuSable's holdings in Chicago. And they asked some thought-provoking questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carol, the founder of Carol Rossbani Architects, to provide our design update.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, actually the biennial is great fun. And if you have a chance to go by it, you can see it from Lakeshore Drive, or you can see it from any of the boat cruises that go up and down the river. What you're seeing now is the plan that you saw last time if you attended our public meeting. The program elements were largely determined by a framework plan that was developed a few years before this design actually started. But those elements stay the same. And just briefly to give you an orientation to the site, the only place you'll be able to enter is off the North Riverwalk. That's point A. We will have a second connection though, however, from the flyover, which is point B. The major elements that were called out in the framework plan included a plaza for public gatherings at the river that was called the River Plaza. We have added a park pavilion, which is D. One major piece of the framework plan was element E, which is, we've called this Exchange Plaza. We're trying to start to turn the history of DuSable in Chicago into more realistic elements. So we called it the Exchange Plaza, but it's a classroom that was requested in the framework plan or foresaw in the framework plan. If you look at F, okay, no, I'm going to go divert it a little bit here. Matthew talked a little bit about one of the big challenges of the site. We have a lot of fill. So rather than haul fill away, what we've tried to do is use it as part of the design. And we've created 3 hills, and they're varying heights. One connects obviously from the flyover, and they'll be they will be overlooks where you can see the site. We have designated an area G as woodland, again, native plants. We have an open lawn that we see as an activity space. And then another piece of the framework plan was a wet prairie or a reference to wet prairie. From the meeting we had with the public and from the steering committee, we did get some responses that were really valuable in the development of this design. One is that this site is to celebrate DuSable, and it will be the site of a major piece of art, a statue of DuSable. So we've been searching for that location. We're going to show you some ideas tonight. People commented that this was a space that needed to be super green and very shady. So we've added trees and canopy shade. There was a question about the amount of seating. We'll show you what we did there. And in general, there was the idea that the really important piece of the site was the edge where you could stand and look over the lake. So we wanted to increase activity. So if we go to our current plan, we can show you where we are today. Basically, it's taking the ideas in the framework plan, the ideas that we got from our meetings, our public meetings so far, and basically amplifying those and enhancing them. So most of the elements are the same, but I do want to, like I said, we will be looking, we have a slide to show you some of the locations for our DuSable statue, but you can see that we're starting to really look at the number of trees and the location of the trees, and there are more trees shown now that we're getting down to the actual design and detailing. In the next few slides, our landscape architect, Misa Inoue, will go through the materials that we're anticipating. We did add more seating, just to point out the seating to you. If you look at between D and E on our little lookout hill, we put some random seating there. Right now, we're thinking that these will be native stones where people can sit and look around the park. We have further developed our classroom E, where we have some stadium style seating that starts to go up the hill. We have added seating. If you start at about point F, we have a continuous park bench seating that also helps us retain that hill that goes all the way to point K. So you'll be able to sit as you walk through the site, or you watch people watch there. It should be really, really nice. We are planning other seating. For example, one new element is J, our boardwalk. And there will be seating all along the boardwalk. We're really excited about this element of the plan because it will be able to enhance the views to the lake that people wanted to enhance. Other things that new pieces that I think you should be aware of. We started finding places for artwork. If you look at K, this is a mural that's being developed by our artist, our on-team artist. I think, do we have more about that too? We may have a little bit more about that for you. We've enhanced our wet prairie at I, and we'll show you some of the materials for that. We have done a little more detailing about our access from the flyover at B. We're providing a bridge there, and we've also started to show a pathway and a stair that will allow people who you can have to walk your bike when you get here, but if you have your bike, you can walk it down this ramp, or you can go down the stairs. So the entire park is accessible to people with handicaps. It's universally accessible. And we did add a second overlook at point F, so you'll be able to walk across the top of these hills and get really closer to the lake. The next presenters will give you a little bit more detail about the materials that we're planning to use, both softscape and hardscape, and some of the interpretation goals and then interpretation design that we've started. So I am pleased to introduce Misa Inoue, who is landscape architect for our team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Misa Inoue with DPDA, and thank you very much for spending the evening with us. Thank you. And also for if you had attended the last two community meetings and provided feedback for us, thank you very much. So as Carol and Matthew explained, we made progress, we think, based upon your comments and our studies, conversations with Chicago Park District team and some of the city agencies. So today we are sharing our updates, and there will be another set of community meetings in a few weeks that we are hoping to host. So today we're giving you a quick glimpse into what we have been doing. This slide and the next slide explain the softscape design and hardscape materials. In this image, the bubble images that you see on the screen show just a few representative trees and plants that we are proposing for the project. Our design goal is to use a mix of trees that have strong and resilient character. For example, large canopy trees that will give shade, and then that large trees that will live for a long, long time. And for example, oaks and ironwood. That also we proposing to use those strong, resilient character trees along with trees that give celebratory character. For example, flowering trees in the spring, and then ornamental trees that give bright colors in autumn. So we all know that the trees are important to shape spaces, and then it gives vertical structures when there is a horizontal space. But at the same time, we are very, very conscious about the goal of this DuSable Park. This is to celebrate DuSable and then his legacy. And so we would like to make sure that we put those characters into the landscape as well. In addition to the trees and of course native shrubs, ground covers, forbs, grasses, all of those play an important role in the landscape design. As Carol mentioned, all plants are native, and our intent is to, by combining the landscape design, planting design with hardscape materials that we will explain later, and history elements, we will have various subspaces within the park, but connect those spaces with the design elements and the paths so that we can take you through a journey through the entire DuSable Park. That's 3.4 acres. So let's go from the entrance. The entrance that Carol explained by the Lakeshore, DuSable Lakeshore Drive from the river walk. That is the entrance, and then we will have large canopy trees with ornamental trees to give a cue to the visitors from the west side of the DuSable Lakeshore Drive coming under the truck through under the tunnel, and also to welcome you. The main path and then park pavilion will be marked by large oak trees and then bald cypress. Bald cypress, as you know, are the tall, soaring character, and it loses trees and leaves in the fall, so you will have a more transparent look view towards the lake. Woodland area on the north have a canopy trees combined with understories like serviceberries and hawthorns and ironwood in combination with oaks that will still give a large canopies. We anticipate that this woodland area on the north facing the Ogden Slip will be a very quiet place within the park. So if you have, if you are looking for a place to reflect and contemplate, that may be the place that will give you that environment. History mural wall on the west have canopy and ornamental trees behind. So behind the wall, and then and then also those trees will help screen the lower DuSable Lakeshore Drive.
Nisu, this is Julia. Sorry to interrupt. Could you
Yes.
repeat what you just said? We kind of lost the sound for that last
Oh,
sentence
you did.
before
I'm
you finished
sorry.
it. Yeah. No apologies. Thank you so very
Okay.
much.
No, thank you for letting me know. Okay. So at the mural wall, we will have canopy on ornamental trees. There are two purposes by those trees. One is to to create a backdrop for the artwork on the mural wall. The second objective is to screen the lower DuSable Lecture Drive, which was some of your concerns at the first round of community meeting. And as Carol mentioned, we have added a number of seating and a variety of seat types through the park. In addition to those custom, boardwalk benches and then stone benches on the hills, we will also have traditional benches with backs and armrests along the main path. Now, wet prairie on the southeast corner facing the water, that is a bio-infiltration feature that takes care of the stormwater runoff from the site. So we need that feature. And in that wet prairie, we will have a couple of dozens of native grasses and sedges, bulbs, and then those will include pollinator plants so that we can help attract bees and other insects that will diversify our environment and the park. The three hills are in the center of the park. The one on the south will be surfaced with lawn. This will be the great place to see the lake and river and then skyline back towards the west. The two north hills are connected, and then those hills will be planted with ground covers and shrubs in combination with some rocks that you see on the screen, those dotted white bubbles. Those will be necessary to help hold the slopes of the hills. The large lawn open space that you see just to the north of the pavilion, that is where the Chicago Park District is planning to host various public programs. And the intent is to have this undistracted view towards the lake, towards east and north and west, and I'm sorry, not west, and towards the east, north and south. And also the reason why that lawn space is sized as it is shown on screen is because that is the minimally required space for CPD's public programs such as the movies at night. So that's the intent. You might be wondering why some of these elements are at the locations where they are currently located. Of course, this is part of the story that we are trying to help create for this park, but also there is a large amount of technical constraints that this site already holds. For example, the river wall, and then the location of the bike trail, the flyover. So there will be those constraints that we will explain later towards the end of this presentation. But we considered all those locations from the existing documents and then tried to carefully locate these elements on the site. The next slide, please. Then this next slide explains the materials, the hardscape materials that we are planning to include in the design. The design intent here is to use natural materials as much as possible, wherever possible, for example, stones and wood, natural wood, but also to combine those natural materials with materials that contribute to sustainable management of the park. For example, precast concrete permeable pavers that characterize the main path in the middle of the park. That is not a natural materials, not in a strict sense, but those type of materials help contribute to better manage the environmental quality of this DuSable Park. All areas are connected with accessible paths, including the boardwalk. There are these subspaces that I just explained in the previous slide. All of those subspaces have accessible paths connecting everything. Pavers define the main path. Those are the precast permeable pavers. Those define the main path through the park, and then plaza in the center, the exchange plaza. The various other materials and give character to each key feature area. For example, the metal pavilion, that's to celebrate DuSable, that's in the center. And so the mural wall on the west will have mosaic tiles and then other artworks and all along that serpentine path. So by combining all these types of different materials and warm colors and the textures, our intent is to take you on a journey through the park, just like we all go through our life journey. Now, after this slide, I believe we are going to share our interpretation goals for the park design. I think it's Matthew, so thank you.
It is. Thanks, Misa. So next, we wanted to discuss the interpretation goals for the project. So these were laid out in the original DuSable Park framework plan from community meetings, other steering committee meetings. We also hosted an in-person art workshop that was led by Dorian Sylvain, who is a very talented muralist and member of the DPDA. So we took everything that we heard from the community during those meetings and used it to refine these interpretation goals. I'll use a cliche and say that art is subjective. So if this language doesn't quite hit right, or if you have any ideas you'd like to share, we are certainly open to keeping this conversation going. So please let us know either during the Q&A or using that web feedback form that we linked in chat. So overall, what we heard from the community was that we wanted the artistic elements in DuSable Park to, one, educate the public on DuSable's heritage and journeys, honor DuSable as the first non-native settler in the area that became Chicago, establishing trade and commerce, recognize the Neshpaneki people as the original stewards of this land, recognize, of course, Kitihawa's role in this story, in part as a translator and cultural ambassador, and also recognizing Harold Washington. This park was, of course, his inspiration, as well as all the park advocates who really fought to bring us to this point that we're currently at. And last but not least, celebrate the natural landscape and location. So the next slide, this is something that Rachel Everson here on the CPD team came up with. It's a way to organize that information from the interpretation goals into this matrix that you see before you. It was developed sort of as a testing tool to identify how each physical element on the site could address those narrative goals. So on the left hand of this grid, you will see each of the site-specific elements listed, the statue, the history walk, etc. And then on the top of the grid, you have each of those narrative goals. So the team reviewed this matrix and specified how each element might meet one or several of those goals. We're kind of using this as a guide to ensure that the physical elements tie back to what we heard the community wants highlighted on site. And then using that to help develop our interpretive content. So with that, I will now pass it over to Ramona Westbrook, the founder of Brook Architecture, to dive in a bit more on the interpretation on site.
Thank you, Matthew. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to be here. We know it's been a while, but we've been working hard and we're excited to share with you the progress that we've made thus far. So you may have noticed on the previous slides that we have a main path that guides you through the park from the main entrance and then terminates at the most contemplative area in the park, the Woodline area. It is a history timeline, and it's a path that helps navigate the users through the park and the journey that we provided for you along the way. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that we're planning to use this path, which connects some of the programmatic areas of the park, like the pavilion, which is A, the Exchange Plaza, which is B, and the Woodland, which is C. And the intent is to share more about DuSable's life and his legacy via a timeline that will be embedded into the path. So the path really acts as a spine and it serves to connect the programmatic areas, but it also serves to bring people along and connect them to the programmatic areas and help them interact not only with those areas, but also with each other. So if you go to the next slide, we can show you that the intent is that at the beginning of the path, we will address DuSable's journey, starting in Haiti and traveling to the Midwest, and that's the area 1. And if you go to area 2, that is the pavilion. And as we're approaching the pavilion, which the pavilion is a representation of DuSable's estate, there we will note more of the events that relate to DuSable's life in Chicago. As you continue along this spline and you go to area 3, when you get to the Exchange Plaza, the intent is to highlight areas that, or highlight examples of his relationships with others in this area. And then the final leg of this path, as you approach the woodland, the intent is to note and celebrate the events of his legacy. Let's see, did I get everything there? Yeah. Oh, the other goal of the path is that it starts to break down the scale of the park. So you've got these 4 different areas, and of course the park has much more than just 4 things, but this main spline gets broken down into 4 separate areas. I think we can go to the next slide. Yes, and so while the events and dates have not been finalized, we expect that the timeline will start to look something like this. You see the red lines indicated along the spline, where the dates along the spline will read like a sequence of events. And the intent is to present the factual information that we know and allow the visitors to develop their own narrative based upon their perspective and their views. So on the next slide, Marcus is going to talk to you about the site, its characteristics, and the proposed sculpture locations. Marcus?
Thank you, Ramona. Thank you all for joining. So I'm going to quickly talk about the park statue that was in the 2006 framework plan. And during our last community engagement meetings, we heard that we wanted the sculpture as close to the water as possible. And we just wanted to kind of like talk you guys through the existing conditions on the site. That kind of creates a challenge for that. And as Misa mentioned, we've had these existing conditions that really helped us navigate the design of the park. So the biggest constraint to really talk about is the existing dead man sheeting and tie rods, which are following the entire site walls. And these are essentially the structure of what is holding up the walls of the park. And as you can see, they kind of go deep into the park so that, you know, the park can stay where it is. And we're going to propose 3 different locations that kind of talk about different areas of where a sculpture can go. That's as close as we can get to the water, but it's still considering these tie rod locations. So location 1 is towards the entrance of the park. And it kind of creates a celebration of who DuSable was, and that, you know, as someone entered the park, it was something that you would engage with at the very instinct and first remarks of the park, and that, you know, it kind of gives you a reason of why you're visiting this park and giving you an illusion of why DuSable was so important to celebrate. It's also still pulled back far away from the flyover so that it still creates its own moment in the park and doesn't encroach on other structures in the park and surrounding the park. Location 2 would be in the wet prairie, and we kind of see this location as a conversation with the pavilion, where the sculpture can kind of maybe relate to the pavilion, or, you know, as it sits lower in the wet prairie within the landscape, it kind of creates a dialogue of that structure and what you would see from the view lines of the pavilion, looking out into the lake and then seeing the statue in the foreground. And then location 3 would be something more conventional along that timeline path that Ramona was talking about. Maybe that sculpture starts to interact with the path itself and the narrative that we're telling, and that it kind of creates its own moment along the path, and that it kind of creates a separate area more towards the north edge of the site instead of closer to the water. And then I think Matthew, you were gonna share a quick D-case update too, as well regarding the sculpture.
Rachel, would you want to jump in and take this one? I know you've been kind of working hard to establish that relationship.
Yeah, sure. So we are currently in conversations with DCASE about the sculpture, as there is likely funding available for that, which is very exciting. However, there are more details forthcoming. So really the update is that we are currently in conversations working with DCASE, as we're also working with other city agencies.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we can jump to the next slide. Thank you, Marcus, as well. So hopefully everything we've shared has kind of given you a good understanding as to where we're at in the design process, how it's continually being shaped by your feedback. So now I wanted to look at what we have lined up for next steps. So taking everything that we hear from you tonight, the design team is going to incorporate that into our design development documents. And then once those are finished, we'll have another set of community meetings. And tonight we're viewing these more high-level plans, kind of to make sure that we're hitting the mark and all the major elements. But the next plans you see during those meetings will be much more detailed. They'll include renders and other visualizations, and hopefully give you a stronger sense as to what it will actually feel like to be a visitor in this wonderful space. And then as we're doing all that, we will continue coordinating with the agencies involved, everyone we had mentioned previously, just kind of getting their input. And then that will lead us to ultimately finishing our construction documents in the fall. We'll get those over to Related Midwest and then start the permit process. The permit process, we want to wait until we're more confident in the design and have reached consensus. So that'll kick off around the end of the year. And moving forward, that'll include things like the Lakefront Protection Ordinance with the Department of Planning and Development, another round of discussions with the agencies we've already mentioned, and ultimately getting this site on a DPD plan committee agenda. So that really concludes our presentation for you tonight. Thank you again for taking the time to join us and listen. But now is our time to listen to you. So we've got that Q&A feature down in the chat down there. And yeah, ask us questions and the panelists will respond.
Hi, my name is Julia Perkins. I'm on the DPDA committee as the overseeing community engagement. Dr. Moore, Ms. Marin have some very long questions and I think observations, and to do them justice, I will read them both because they're interrelated. I'll start with Dr. Moore. While I appreciate that there is a celebration of DuSable's life, as a Black woman leaning into my intersectionality, I am left to ponder why the city chooses only to celebrate DuSable and not the thousands of Native notables people who have left an indelible mark in our city. I specifically like to understand why we would not name the park after Kitty Howard. My concern with the over-focus on DuSable is that we're leaning into and preferring a settler narrative. A settler is someone who moves into the area, does not adopt the form of government and culture of the people already established. DuSable was not a settler. He respected the Potawatomi culture, government, business and way of life. And as a man that came from Haiti who understands the importance of revolting against white supremacy, I think he would be offended with the focus on him by the city in this way, as the city overly focuses on settlers' history versus Native narrative. So my question is, why not name the park after Kitty Howard? The follow-up question that Dr. Moore has posed. Also, I would like to know if there are Native American people on the decision on decision-making committees for this park. Please read both of my questions aloud, and even if they're harder to answer, as I believe it could lead to a healthy conversation ongoing forward. So I'll pause there and then read Ms. Mirren's remarks. And I will turn, I think, Dr. Moore's question over to CPD, Chicago Park District.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Heather Gleason, Director of Planning for the Park District. So I will attempt to answer Dr. Moore's thoughtful question. And then certainly, Matthew, if you have other comments to add, feel free to jump in. So just to give a little bit of history of how the name of the park came about, because I think it is important to the context of what is being shown here. So in 1987, Harold Washington, Mayor Harold Washington, who was our first African-American mayor, named this park for DuSable, because as we have forgotten many people's contributions and histories to this geography and this city, we had also forgotten his. And people have been waiting for 30 years to see this park that is named after him, but was not developed. And so I often say when we're talking about things like this, that we have many amends to make, and this is just the beginning and not the end. I can tell you that we do plan to celebrate Kitty Hawa as well. Not necessarily by renaming the park, but by acknowledging her significant contribution and her tribe's significant contribution to helping DuSable navigate relations within the city as well. And I also don't think that this is the only site or opportunity that we have to discuss other ways of honoring those who came before the settlers who came to this area. This is the beginning of that conversation, not the end. So while this is one opportunity to do that, I think it would be remiss of the Park District and the city at large to say that this is the only opportunity to do that and the only site to do that. So I welcome the discussion from our Native American partners and groups. And to answer another portion of your question, we do have Native American representation on our steering committee, but we have also said that we need to have a separate conversation to make sure that we are appropriately representing Kitty Hawa in particular, and also just getting our language correct about the different cultural groups that helped to form Chicago very, very early on prior to settler history. We realize that some of the language that we're using is not potentially correct. And I believe Dr. Lowe, who was on our steering committee, corrected us at our steering committee meeting that some of the terms that we're using are not correct. And so we want those comments and we want to hear that from the community so that we can work together to get things right. So I will pause there, but I just wanted to acknowledge your comment and thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Heather. I will read Dr. Marone's comments, and please forgive me if I mispronounce, which I know that I will, some of the Native American heritage that you listed. I will do my best. I really appreciate the Kitty Hawa as being recognized as an essential to DuSable success and survival, and indeed the Potawatomi were the primary group at Chicago when DuSable arrived. However, there are several tribes who are also here and acted as stewards of the land prior to DuSable's arrival. The Ho-Chunk, the Odawa, the Ojambi, the Sauk, the Kickapoo, and their other names I just don't want to mispronounce and not do justice, but they are in the chat. So if you are recognizing the original stewards of the land, I think it's important to recognize all of these groups, even if you're going to especially focus on the Potawatomi, since they are the main group that would have interacted with DuSable. Also, Nishnepek refers to the Confederation of the Ojibwe and the Ottawa and Potawatomi people, and not just the Potawatomi. The Potawatomi name for themselves in their own language. And Dr. Marone, I am so sorry that I am mispronouncing these names, so please forgive me. That is Dr. Miron's comments. I don't know, Heather, if you want to respond.
Sure, I can do that. Thank you, Julia. And thank you, Dr. Moran. I think we absolutely welcome your comments. And as I mentioned in the previous comment that I made, we know we don't have this right yet. But I do think that it's important to recognize that that we have many opportunities and many learning opportunities to talk about how we can recognize the contributions of the people who came before us, really, and the stewards of the land prior to the settlers. We have not finished interpretation. We are still working through that. I think in the chart that you saw this evening, that is really the beginning of us trying to figure out what sites on the park itself are able to be interpreted. But I do need to say pretty clearly to everyone as well that that this park was designated as DuSable Park. And a huge portion of the park is going to be dedicated to also his legacy. So I realize that we are wrestling with these things and we have to continue to have the conversation. So I really appreciate all these comments, because we do need to have a conversation with many of you who have a lot more knowledge than the Park District does about the different tribes that were here before us, of the history. So those of you who have that information, we are looking to set up another meeting that will allow all of us to continue this conversation and really look for other opportunities to create recognition throughout the Park District as well as throughout the city. I think that we are much like the Monument Committee did, looking at all of these different issues that we're wrestling with. Our work is just beginning. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and correcting us when we're wrong and helping us to navigate this really important time where we're interpreting, history in new lights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. I saw that Nicholas Paul had your hand up. There were two questions before you, Mr. Paul, or two statements, so that we could circle back to you after I read them. Mr. Sanat has said, I appreciate your thoughts and efforts to recognize DuSable and his connection to the natives who were here before he arrived. My question is, when will this become public? Heather, did you want to field that question?
Yeah, I'm not 100%. So obviously we're having public meetings now, and we've had several of them. If you're talking about the interpretation, we are in the works on starting to pull that messaging together. So we do hope to have more information that we can share with all of you soon, so that you can give us further feedback. Obviously, we're not showing, specifics of how we're recognizing everything in this particular presentation, but that is partly why we're having these conversations, so that we can hear from all of you, and we will come back in the future and share more details.
Thank you,
I also
Heather.
just want to add, for everybody raising their hands, we don't have the capabilities to unmute you and have you speak. So if you have any follow-up, please feel free to type them into that Q&A box as well.
Thank you for that, Matthew. We have a question or a comment from Jen Gilgore, who is a member in transparency of the steering committee. She says the steering committee is very concerned about the safety on the flyover. The flyover sees high volume, high speed bicycle traffic, which is consistent with this purpose. The southbound approach to access point is a decline, which adds to speed. As with the limited access road, there needs to be room for separation and speed change when transitioning to an entrance/exit ramp. Otherwise, the risk of traffic backups at best and crashes at worst. For example, the Bloomingdale Trail, which is wider than the flyover and also has a soft vegetative edge as a buffer, has transition transition zones at the top of each ramp, and they are still complex as people merge on and off. We are also concerned about the park spaces required to accommodate the transition. The interior of the park should not bear the burden of transportation infrastructure. We envision the hilltop as a destination and a prime spot for taking in views. Mr. Branchinger seems to agree with Ms. Gilmore's comments. I will then turn it over to maybe a DPDA or CPD representative to respond.
So I can start, and then maybe I can turn it over to Carol or Ramona and see, or Marcus, and talk a little bit more about how we're envisioning this. But Jen, thank you for your comments.
Heather, you seem to be muted. Could you
No,
repeat
just
that?
Oh, I'm muted?
No,
Yes,
you're
now you're
fine. I
not.
think you froze for a second. That's
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Okay.
All right, then I'm going to be quick.
okay.
Very concerned about it. We are looking at it. I am going to turn it over to Ramona and Carol in case I'm having trouble with my connection and you can't hear me, but we very much acknowledge that challenge. So go ahead, Ramona, if you'd like to add any comments there.
Sure, sure. So we did study this connection to from the flyover down to this hill, and we actually were concerned about the amount of traffic that was there as well, which is why we laid the ramp out in such a way that it's angled and has a wider opening at that point. We've also oriented it to the north so that the traffic that is coming from the north has more space and more time to cross the traffic that is northbound, if that makes sense. And one of the other things that we thought was important was to keep the opening or the ramp to the park as close to the existing ramp. There is a ramp a little further north on this trail that is actually an intersection. And rather than try to create another intersection far away from that, which means that people would have to slow down twice on this trail, we thought we would keep it as close to that activity as possible so that people are already in a slower mode when they get to this portion of the flyover connection. We do recognize that it is a bit of a challenge, but the intent is that when you get to this point, you come into that area, you get off your bike and you walk it down into the park. The park is intended to be more contemplative. It's not a very active kind of park. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Ramona. We have a variety of other questions that are coming in through the Q&A. I will go to Gail Spring, who is also a member of the advisory committee. She comments that I love the boardwalk around the park so that people can view it keeps changing, view the river and turning basin. However, I think it should be a minimum of 16 feet wide, like the Riverwalk and tunnel under Lakeshore Drive. There needs to be room for sitting in trees along the Riverwalk as well. Since we want the connection with the water, we don't want railings. All the more reasons we need a wide boardwalk. Thank you for that feedback. Ms. Gilmore has another statement. Wondering about the amount of space needed for accessible transition given the elevation changes being underestimated. We suggest creating the bike wheelchair access ramp by the bridge house at the south of DuSable Park, create landing point and then a ramp with potential switchback depending on space as a suggestion. Did you want to respond, Carol? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
These two.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've looked at a number of different widths for the boardwalk, and what we're trying to do is to balance the experience. In fact, my company was a designer of the Riverwalk, so I know the spaces you're talking about pretty intimately, and I think that it's been our understanding that when this is done, Ramona's used the word contemplative a few times, that this will be a slower, more meandering, more park-like space than the Riverwalk. And that's how we arrived at the depth that we're showing now. We'll continue to look at it. I mean, the discussions are ongoing, but what we're really trying to provide here is a slowdown, a variety of experiences. Actually, we wanted to look at the lake not just from the boardwalk, but from the hills that we're creating, from the lawn. It's this place will a place where you slow down and you think about Chicago and its history. So we'll continue to look at it though. Oh, one other question that you asked about the railing. Right now, there's no railing plan for the edge. There's seating along the back. We'll have more details on this at our next presentation when we firm them up. And we're using the edge of, if you've gone there now, there's basically a seawall that projects up. That will be the edge of the boardwalk. So there'll be a little bit of protection, but there won't be a railing, and you'll be able to sit back and really, there won't be any visual obstruction to the lake. I hope I've covered some of it. A lot of it will be more detailed the next time that we show it.
Thank you, Carol. We have another comment from another advisory member, Mr. Senate. He says, the public meeting, when will it be open for use?
Oh, that'll be with the current schedule, we're looking at Q3 of 2027.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Matthew.
Hey, Julia, just
Oh,
let me
yeah, go
add a
ahead.
caveat to that really quickly. Thank you, Matthew. That's a target date right now. So just to let people know, Related Midwest is, using our site for staging and then building the park. So we don't have a firm date, but we are hopeful that we will be able to come back to you with more information as their project proceeds as well. So that is a target date that we want to share with everybody, but we want to also put a little pin in it that there's a lot of construction that still has to be done. So thank you.
Yeah, and I have another thing I want to add. I know there was a question I wanted to answer. The question about the bridge house. The Park District is continuing. The bridge house is owned by CDOT, the Chicago Department of Transportation, and the Park District continues to negotiate these interchanges. So that one's still out there. We can't tell you now if you will be able to access the park from the bridge house, but it is being discussed by the city, various parts of the city. Heather, I hope I didn't step on your toes.
Thank you, Carol and Heather. Dr. Como has another a comment. I'm sorry, the comment the Q&A box keeps running around. There seems to be also an exchange going between Dr. Como and Dr. Moore. Dr. Como said, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Although I appreciate Mrs. Moore's perspective, I beg to differ. The fact by the city of Chicago to name the park after DuSable in no way suggests an exclusive celebratory intent. As a settler, DuSable was a remarkable innovator, humanist, and entrepreneur, and he did not behave in the usual settler way, which essentially consisted in dominating the natives. In a trailblazing manner, in sync with the land of revolution from which he came, he reached out to the natives and married one of them. Thus, it's regrettable to approach this experience of the couple in a competitive sort of way. DuSable and Kittihawa were partners, and there is no historical evidence of any dichotomy in their actions. I've never heard mention of the legacy of DuSable without the immediate associated with Kittihawa. With this said, it is simply appropriate to name the park after DuSable for the simple reason that he was the one to set his post at the junction of Lake Michigan and the Chicago River while making the bridge with the natives. Again, there was a conversation with Dr. Moore who disagrees that we really already have a museum and an expressway named after DuSable. This is what I meant by the overfocus on him. Please tell me what public space in Chicago honors his wife in a way or other Native person in this way. At the very least, the park should be named after both of them to honor their relationship In addition, I think it's not only a settler narrative that generally prevails in this country, but is an approach that overly focuses on the contribution of men. And we have another comment by our Sergey, who is also on the advisory committee. He mentions that the Central Mound seems to be the most important location on the park. Perhaps the DuSable Monument should go there where people can gather around it with the best view of the surroundings. From the lake, the river, and Navy Pier, the monument would appear with a dramatic Chicago skyline in the background. Is one of the suggestions. Carol or Heather, would you like to respond?
I can make.
Carol, you're on mute.
Okay, I took myself off. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No? Okay. Most of the sentiment that we had from our public meetings was that the statue should be near the water's edge. I like this suggestion. After talking with the Park District, I think that maybe we should look at it. One of the things that's holding us up right now is we are waiting for, in fact, the discussions have just started with DCase to find the artist who will be making this piece. And I think when we know that information and what more about the statue, we'll be able to select the site more appropriately. In fact, I hope that the artist is part of that selection. So yes, I think that that's a possible site. I mean, as the designer of the park, I think that would work fine. But I would like to wait to see, what it looks like and what the attitude is of the sculptor. So I think it's pretty exciting, and yeah, we'll put that in the hopper.
Thank you so much for that response, Carol. I know we have some other questions coming in, and we were to end at 7, but I think in fairness, we would like to read all of your questions. We hope that you can stay with us. Mr. Brashinger indicates that I hope that in the next presentation that you'll have a more detailed description of the park entry point A and how the park will be accessed from North Water Street. Aaron Brown asks, will pets be welcomed in the park?
Do you want to do those together or separately?
I think we could maybe bundle them if that's okay, just in, sake of time, if that's okay.
Okay. We are still, our property line ends at point A. So we're working with the other, they're all public agencies at this point, but the other agencies to work out those details. I am also concerned about that entry, so I hope we have a lot more at our next meeting. And I'm not going to go to the pet one. I think, Heather, you have to do that one.
Yeah, no, understood.
Can I just add though to the point A? We are planning planning to show the connection to Water Street. Well, even though it's not a part of our scope of work, we do plan to show how that connection is located with reference to point A.
Agreed. It's very important for the park.
It is. And I would just add to Mr. Breshinger's question that we're not only looking at how people can enter our park at point A, but we are also working with Related Midwest and CDOT, who have some of the property on the other side of Lakeshore Drive. I don't think that we have fully worked out how all these access points are going to come in, but I take your point absolutely that we should be thinking more holistically about how people are getting into the park at point A by looking at some of what our partners are doing as well. So thank you. That is absolutely something that we can do in a subsequent presentation. And with respect to the pets, dogs on leash will be welcome. That is the Park District's rule. But we have not necessarily set specific policies for this particular park. I feel like it's come up in a couple of subsequent previous community meetings. But generally speaking, as long as dogs are on leash, they are generally welcome. I think the challenge that we sometimes have is that we do have residents that don't follow that rule, and we are aware of that. It is a real challenge for us to police that issue. So, at the moment, I think our thought is that dogs on leash will be welcome in the park, but certainly we can take that up at the Park District and discuss it further if people are concerned.
Thank you, Heather. Going on to Mr. Flinkinger's comment, there seems to be an opportunity to create a floating paddler kayak access dock on this new park near letter J. It is protected. It is a protected area. The bridge behind the bridge of Billion. This would be the first truly public access point on the main stem and would be good to serve the rapidly growing river recreational users as an emergency takeout or visitor interest from the water. Would love to have explored that part. Would love to have that explored as part of the design. Does anyone
Yeah, I
want?
can take that, Julia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. So we can certainly chat about it in the design team. So one thing to keep in mind that I would want us to be concerned about, well, two things. We don't have money in the budget to necessarily create a dock or kayak, unfortunately. As strange as this might sound, our budget is relatively tight to get the green space, and our commitment is to make sure that that is done. It does not mean that we can't. I always say we're never done designing a park or creating a park. Even once something is designed, there's always phase 2 or phase 3 or things that we're looking at. So there's certainly opportunities to explore that, in the future. However, Point J in particular, and that whole edge is going to have a lot of high wave traffic, because that is also where a lot of the tourist boats come in. So one thing I think, if we're going to have that conversation, that we might consider whether G, or the area on the north side of the park, might be a better experience for paddlers and kayakers and calmer water. I always worry a little bit when we have really high boat traffic that, operators are paying attention to people who are using paddlecraft or kayaks or smaller crafts. So we might want to consider whether or not there's a better access point on the north side that just gives people a little bit more opportunity to kind of get in the water in a safe manner and that sort of thing. But it's certainly something that we can explore in the future.
Okay, we still have a lot of comments coming in, and we're trying to, again, be courteous to get to all of them. So I'll go a little bit quicker. Sergey, who is also on the, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson said that we look forward to scheduling a meeting with the local Native American community to discuss the details of the representation and honoring of the original people that inhabited this land. We recognize that this is a high-level view, but we must understand the detail. This area was an active trading site with people residing here since time immemorial. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for that comment. Sergey, who is also a member of the committee, says, should we consider other entry points for bicycles and wheelchair other than via the central mound? Carol.
We have continually tried to create more access points, and those negotiations are continuing between the Park District and CDOT and Related Midwest. Right now, though, I think that we have to count on having the entries that we currently are showing.
Thank you so much for that, Carol. I'm sorry, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I know there's a question about having an entry point closer to the gatehouse. And the challenge with that is that it's actually a blind spot. And so you have a lot of traffic, fast traffic that's coming around that corner. And then to have an entryway or require that traffic slow when they're already going pretty fast and it's a blind spot, we just felt was way too dangerous. So we have studied it. We'll continue to look at it, but we really think that this location that we have is probably the safest location along this stretch.
Thank you for that, Ramona. Ms. Gilmore again says, thanks, we did a walk about of the flyover on a sunny Saturday, and we did not observe slowing down at that spot. Just stopping us to look at the park from the flyover was dicey with all of the traffic. We were thinking about people who are riding in groups, even just 2 people stopping to turn off. It's hard to visualize how this wouldn't create conflicts. Thank you for that, Ms. Gilmore. Dr. Colme says we've already have a museum and expressway named after DuSable. I guess there needs to be a limit in recognizing this Black man, as if there's no other location where Kitty Howard could be specifically honored. We have another comment then from another advisory member, Edzer, and I do apologize that I am slaughtering names. I'm very sorry. But let me go forward. Thank you, CPD and DPDA, for this update. I'm heartfelt by the idea of history mural to tell DuSable's story. As we speak, there's a type of historical revisionism that is taking place. In an article published in the Digital Research Library of the Illinois History by Dr. Neil Bale wrote, up until the time of his capture, DuSable was engaged in the fur trade. All engagees in trade license holders had to swear an oath of loyalty to the king before the commander at Montreal and sign a printed oath incorporated in the license. DuSable would have signed by making his mark since he was illiterate, as most NJs were. This is not factual, considering that his captors described him as highly intelligent. Now here is the kicker. Dr. Bell went on to write, Point de DuSable was born free. He was the son of parents still not identified, possibly born at Vandrella, near Montreal before 1750. His mother was a free woman, not a slave. Unbelievable. We also have another comment that says there is also DuSable Harbor, DuSable Bridge, DuSable Ellis Lakeshore Drive, DuSable Park, DuSable Museum, perhaps others, but these are the ones I'm aware of. Ms. O'Brien states there are a number of bird watchers in the area, and I have been asked if any bird houses would be considered in the park. I will pause there. CPD or DPDA, please respond.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think so the idea of birdhouses has not come up specifically, but that is a great idea. I'm an avid birder myself. I know that a lot of the trees that are currently being shown on site were specifically chosen by the natural resources team because of the role they play in creating habitat for birds. But I think that is something we could consider.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Brien, for that idea. Nile Mystery, I hope I'm saying that correct, states that the site plan clearly indicates the positioning and scale of the boardwalk and flyover connection. The timeline path, which organizes several elements for contemplation and commemoration as foundation of the design concept, is less clear at this point. I hope to learn how the experience of the timeline path will be developed as a powerful contribution to the city. Shade, vegetation, paving, all offer exciting opportunities to do so. Thank you so very much for that comment. And this is the last one that Will would take, yet by Exer, another advisory committee member. This article was written in the 1950s. It was published on Thursday, September 2nd, 2021, under the title An In-Depth History of Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, Chicago founder. I think that is all. I am looking at the time. We are 17 minutes over. We are so appreciative of, I think, the robust exchange that has occurred. And again, I hope I did justice to your comments and observations. I think I'll turn it over to Chicago Park District to have the closing remarks. And again, thank you all for participating in today's interim community presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Have you wrap this up in a second. I just want to thank everyone for attending tonight and to continue to push us on not just the physical design of the park, but also how we are interpreting the park. And we really appreciate your thoughtful comments. And there will be a lot more follow-up in the weeks ahead. Matthew, go ahead and close us out if you would.
Yeah, thank you everyone, especially I know we're a little bit over time here, but you've given us a lot to think about. So we're going to be taking all of your feedback and really digging into the next phase of the design process. We have some upcoming community meetings. We have not scheduled them yet, but they will most likely be occurring next month. So we'll have a follow-up for you then. So in the meantime, check your emails, but thank you again for coming out tonight, and we really appreciate all your feedback.
Okay, I removed everyone.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank-
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
No, that's all I just wanted to
I'm
say.
still
Just oh,
seeing-
oh my goodness.
I'm
And
still
I think,
seeing one participant.
There's someone still here.
okay, hold on. No, I'm looking at the attendees. Oh, that's
Yeah.
one of the, okay, hold on. Okay, he's
Yeah, I
now
keep
removed.
trying to remove, but it name's
Yeah.
not going away.
That might just be a UI glitch. So it
He's
shows
been, that was
attendees 0.
That was
and,
Adam,
Okay.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's
but I
just one.
can't.
Oh, I'm gonna stop recording.
He said he has been removed. But I don't know why the name is up there. Anyway, I